All right, welcome back everyone to the Nikhil Hogan Show, and I have a really great guest. This is Professor John Salmon, and he was a recommendation from one of my dear audience in the comment section for a new guest or guests when I asked for recommendations coming out of the summer break, and one of you said you have to get John Salmon on. He has a terrific lecture on improvising in Beethoven, and classical improvisation is exactly what we love on this show. And so, Professor John Salmon, welcome to the Nikhil Hogan Show.
Thank you, Nikhil. It's a great pleasure to be here. This is one of my favorite topics, and I can go on for hours talking about the evolution of Werkzeuge and the what happened to improvisation among classical pianists in the 19th century, one of my favorite topics. So I'm afraid you picked the right/wrong guest.
No, I'm surprised I didn't discover you earlier. That's my shock. Now you said all the right words. You said all the right topics. And actually, in some ways, I'm more interested in you because how did you find yourself involved in these topics? It's such a rare thing in classical music for improvisation to even exist in the modern age. So tell me your story. Why don't you start from wherever you want to start?
Well, I don't quite know the easy answer to that. I do know that when I started playing the piano and taking piano lessons at the age of 6, my older sister, Carol, I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, and my older sister, Carol, belonged to a jazz record club. And each month she would receive a new LP. And she got an LP by Count Basie, Duke Ellington, and I'll never forget when she got the Time Further Out album of Dave Brubeck in 1961 or 62. I would have been 7 or 8 years old. And my parents say that I would take that album. You know what an LP is?
Yes.
That was the old way of listening to music. I would take this LP of Dave Brubeck's Time Further Out, put it on the stereo. I was only 7 or 8 years old, and then put the needle on and sit there and listen, absolutely involved in the music. So my first exposure to jazz was through Dave Brubeck, and he became a very important part of my life ever since then. And I grew up playing both jazz piano and classical piano. I played in the stage band, and in high school in 1970, I went on a State Department tour of Europe with my high school jazz band, and I played with a jazz trio, and we did my own compositions in jazz clubs in Rome, in London. I still remember some of the pieces that I played. One was called Folk Dance, which went like this. I don't know if you could hear that, but anyway, I was both a classical and a jazz pianist. And I remember that I actually thought about majoring in jazz instead of classical. And growing up in Fort Worth, of course, Denton, Texas was just a short drive away. And the University of North Texas had a great jazz program. So I briefly considered going to North Texas to study jazz. But for some reason, I kept on the classical route. But I've always been a composer and an improviser. And it wasn't until about 30 years ago that I started to inquire into the idea of improvising in the classical idiom. And that brought out a lot of topics and a lot of research.
Wait a
Have I
second.
spoken enough?
Wait a second. There's a lot to unpack here. I mean, I want to ask questions like, what did your classical teacher think of your jazz predilections, or for instance, how did you, because in some senses the modern classical style, play fast, memorize, no mistakes, and comparing that with jazz, which is, you improvise, you compose, you play in an ensemble. They're two different paths. Did your brain have to separate I'm playing classical now, it's a certain way. I'm playing jazz now, it's a certain way. How did you balance that as you were developing?
Well, I didn't. My classical teachers never asked about my jazz inclinations. And when I went to classical lessons, I did what I was supposed to do. I had the right fingering, I had the right hand position, I practiced scales, technique. I had a classical upbringing, and they had no interest or curiosity as to the intersection between improvisation, no interest in what musicians used to do before the 19th century. Um, it was do only what is, and also there was a kind of unspoken obligation to do what's on the score. Nur was geschrieben wird, only what's written. I don't know why I said that in German, except that the Germans have a lot to do with this
Yes.
trajectory of the Werktreue. Oh, remind me to talk to you about the Leipzig Conservatory in 1843. That's another
Okay.
big topic.
Okay. Can I ask you about, you said they weren't interested. Were they hostile, or did you ever hear
No,
your classical
it
colleagues
was
say, I don't like that, that's disrespectful, or were they just not interested? Like, just, it wasn't a topic at all?
Well, it was just not in the realm of discussion. If I went in and I was playing a Beethoven sonata, we would talk about Beethoven sonata. And if I played a Bach fugue, we only talked about what was in the score. Nur was geschrieben wird. There again, I go in German. Only what's on the page. And this whole idea that as a classical musician, you do only what's on the page. That's a very big topic. And that's at the heart of the Werktreue discussion that Lydia Gurr uh, articulates in her articles from 30 plus years ago.
Well, so did you, as this young student, ever ask yourself when you were playing Beethoven, playing Bach, playing Chopin, what were these composers like? Were they like, were they was are they were they like my teacher, or were they like the other classical pianists I see today? Did it ever think, like, how did they come up with this music? Was that like ever? And I'm sure you have to do some sort of classical theory, right? And when you were doing classical piano.
Oh, yes. I remember that when I was 11 years old, my parents hired a music theory professor to give me private theory lessons in harmony and counterpoint. And this man was very much, according to the old school, I remember the first thing he gave me were the four cardinal rules of harmonic uh, progressions. And one of the first ones was no parallel fifths, no parallel octaves. And I can remember playing pop music um, that had parallel fifths. I mean, if you're playing pop music, you play. But it never occurred to me um, why we couldn't have parallel fifths or parallel octaves. We were learning, of course, the tradition of counterpoint, but they were not really rules. It was just a tradition, of course. But this is a very complex topic for me. I've always wondered why. Oh, I don't know. At some point, I'll have to tell you this anecdote of from about 20 years ago. I was giving this lecture for a group of piano teachers in Portland, Oregon, and it was on the very topic of improvising in Beethoven. And after this lecture, I remember there was this Russian piano teacher in the back of the room who said, "Mr. Salmon, why you do this?" And I said, "Because because Beethoven did it." And then she said, "If my students do this, they be eliminated from competition." And then she said again, "Mr. Salmon, why you do this?" I said, "Because Beethoven did it." And I remember she said, "But you're not Beethoven." And that those words have always stuck with me. Um, you
Wow.
know,
And she's
about
not,
five
and
years ago.
that's like a representative sample almost of an attitude. I mean, that attitude is not unique. I mean, it's like yeah,
Well,
it's so
it's the prevalent attitude. I remember
exactly.
5 years ago judging for the North Carolina Music Teachers Association, and I was given the rules, the guidelines, the judges' guidelines, and one of the guidelines was uh, adherence, fidelity to the score. And I asked the leader of the organizer of this event. I said, "Well, what if a student wants to do a few Verzierungen, ornamentations on the repeat, and that's not in the score, on the repetition of a section?"
Hmm.
And then he just went like this, because textual fidelity is one of the presuppositions inherent in the ideology of judging piano competitions. So there's a lot of ideology to overcome.
Uh, yeah, you're bringing up all these. Yeah, this is fantastic stuff. But I want to talk a little. Let's continue more about you because your story is really fascinating. So we're going to touch on all these things. So you study classical music. When did you really? You said 30 years ago or something, 40 years ago. You really started really tackling classical improvisation. So explain to me what that catalytic moment was and how you got into it.
Well, it's hard to pinpoint a moment, but I do remember sponsoring a symposium here at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, in 2002, dedicated to the piano music of Beethoven. And our guest presenter at that conference was Malcolm Bilson,
All
one
right.
of the premier forte pianists. And I remember playing Opus 110 at this conference. And I guess I was a little bit of a rebel rouser or a troublemaker. I remember in the recitative section, I did this. Something like that.
Beautiful.
And
What was his
so
reaction?
in the recitative section, I decided to go. I mean, he goes to E major, and I decided to have a little bit of a fun. I kind of nostalgically quoted Opus 109 in this Opus 110 sonata. And I remember asking Malcolm what he thought about it later, and he was actually very happy that I did that. He said that's exactly the sort of thing people should do. His only critique of my performance of the Opus 110 sonata was when I got to the Klagende Gesang, this part. He wanted more of this, more of the oh, 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 oh. And I decided not to do that because I was playing a modern Steinway. And if I did that, it would overwhelm the right hand. Um, but he was all too very happy and supportive of the idea of improvising. I don't know if Malcolm has himself done a lot of improvising in classical pieces. Robert Levin, on the other hand, has done quite a bit. Have you interviewed Robert Levin?
I did, yeah. I think it was 2019. It was a great interview. Yeah, it was. He was saying many of the things you're saying.
He's one of my inspirations. Well, Malcolm is too, and I'm forever engaging with uh, forte pianists and historical performance people. Even though I don't play the forte piano, I read treatises like this, and I'm always discussing uh, the latest. I nitpick at Leopold Mozart's Violinschule. I go through CPE Bach's Versuch über die wahre Art, das Klavier zu spielen, the treatise on playing the keyboard instruments. And I'm a weird guy. It's kind of like an atheist who's arguing with theologians because I don't play the Stein or Graf or Walter forte pianos, but I'm very influenced by that sound. So I think Malcolm was right when he told that I had to have more of a klagender Gesang in the left hand of that arioso dolente.
Well, let me ask you this, Professor Salmon. Did you? Well, there's two things. The first is you've already kind of laid out that you do a lot of research. You do a lot of your own work. You work at this. It's a craft. Could you walk maybe my audience? How did you put that together piece by piece? I mean, how did you start off doing this? Well, I'm sure it wasn't as fluent as you just did it right now. But how did you start off? What was your beginning steps like?
You mean to derive inspiration from historical
No,
treatises?
the actual improvisation, like the actual extemporization.
I don't know. It's a very gradual process. It's happened very gradually. I mean, there's certain key moments, and that was one of them in 2002 when I decided to give a lecture on improvising in Beethoven. Oh, I don't know if you've seen that lecture that's on YouTube. I gave another iteration of that lecture that's on YouTube now. It was recent, in which I encapsulated all of my points about improvising in Beethoven. It's a very thorny issue. You know that most ideology that has to do with interpretation of Beethoven is built on that one statement from Czerny when he said that you are not to change or alter any notes when performing the works of any of the great masters, but especially Beethoven. And of course, he had his hand slapped in 1816 when he dared to put in some kind of Verzierung, fantasy Durchgang in one of Beethoven's pieces, and Beethoven wrote him a letter and said, "You'll forgive a composer who would prefer to hear his works performed as written." So that became a kind of change, a moment for Czerny. Now, this is a huge topic because Czerny himself had written a treatise on improvisation in the late 1820s, early 1830s. But then after that, he goes on to say, but when you're playing Beethoven, you cannot change notes. You cannot change or add any notes. Even, places that would have been like, we see in the, I mean, that's a place where if there's a fermata on a D set, on a dominant seven, if you were a performer in Beethoven's day and you got to a D7, a dominant seven chord with a fermata on it, and you didn't do any kind of Eingang, Übergang uh, connection, that would have been a little bit weird, a little bit
It's bland.
not
Nothing happened.
necessarily wrong, but it's kind of like if you go to Munich in October, I mean, Okay, and you don't have a Wurst and a beer. Um, that's a little bit strange. I mean, or you could get they even have non-alcoholic beer in Munich. So, um,
I get what
anyway,
you're saying. I totally get what
um,
you're saying. And this is stuff that, yeah, exactly what you said. They take a quote from Czerny and they run with it. It's become almost like a dogma of this kind of a
it's
pseudo religion.
one of my favorite books. You can't see I have all these books over here, but one of my favorite books is by William S. Newman, who was a musicology professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and his book Beethoven on Beethoven, which is wonderful, and I love his works. But basically, the ideological linchpin of his book is that you do what's on the page. You try to interpret what the composer wrote, and of course, you have to use an urtext. I mean, that's another big topic. Um, the Werktreue idea, which coincides with the evolution of the urtext. The urtext, of course, was a German concept, and it coincided with the German attempt to establish national identity. I have to also mention Denkmäler deutscher Tonkunst, which was the monuments of German musical art, musical compositions, which was started in the late 19th century and culminated around 1932, which was also supposedly the beginning of the whole concept of urtext. Okay, let's not go any further than that because I don't want to muddy the waters too much. But um, the idea that the piece of music is some kind of immutable monument that cannot be altered. That was the ideology that existed, and it still exists. I mean, urtext. If you the Italians didn't care about urtext. The Italians
Yeah, they
was
were all scholastics and they didn't care for this romantic nonsense. I mean, it's just German idealistic garbage. If I may be so blunt.
well. There's a lot to unpack here. One of my favorite topics is Mendelssohn and the establishment of the Leipzig Conservatory
Yes,
in
that's what you said.
1843.
Let's go into that topic. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, well, in 1843, Mendelssohn, one of the great musicians of ever, established the Leipzig Conservatory. And one of the things he did there was to make two majors. You could be a piano performance major or a composition major, but you couldn't do both. Whereas beforehand in Europe, and it still was going on in Italy, you were a music major, which meant you composed, you improvised, you played an instrument, you did everything. But he decided that there would be piano majors and composition majors, and those two tracks were separate. And the piano majors had two teachers, one for Vortrag, interpretation, and one for technique. And they had to practice 4 hours a day, mainly doing technical exercises. And and also their theory, music theory courses were all on paper. And whereas previously it was very much you did what you were at the piano, you would realize a figured bass, you would do a partimento. It was very much a practical thing. But in Germany and Leipzig in 1843, music theory became only on paper. Now, as a result, the Leipzig tradition kind of established a reputation or gained a reputation as producing these mechanical, fingerfertig little virtuosos. And one time, Franz Liszt was giving a master class, and somebody from Leipzig or I don't know if it was from Leipzig, but somebody was playing one of his Liebestraum number 1, I think. And Franz Liszt said, "You're playing in too much of a Leipzigerisch eins, zwei, drei, vier way. You're playing in too much of a 1, 2, 3, 4. Sort of cut and dried and uh, Fingerfertigkeit, but not, he said, you have to imagine that you're in another world. You have to allow yourself to play. So it's not that there was anything wrong with Mendelssohn or the Leipzig tradition, but this helped to kind of cement the idea that you had pianists, performers, and you had composers, and the two did not cross paths. And the idea that you could be both a composer and a pianist at the same time kind of evaporated in the 19th century, little by little. And concurrently, the establishment of Werkteile and Urtext came into being, which was a damper on the idea of doing anything to alter the text.
And I
Do
had a
you,
guess. Yes.
do you feel sorry for my students now?
I feel sorry for the whole generation of classical musicians. I mean, like, what have we done to our ever continual generations of students who have lost this creative craftsmanship art of improvising, and we've replaced it with this horror show. You brought up something that was interesting about these two tracks. I had a great guest, Professor Lydia Carlisi, I believe, and she talked about the Paris Conservatory, and it's something like that happened as well. They had different tracks. There was a composer track. There was a pianist track as well in France, the Paris Conservatory. Is this a 19th century thing?
I'm unaware of what happened in France, and I know that Germany is not completely to blame, but the trajectory towards doing what's only on the page, I think, is rooted in German traditions. I think that Czerny definitely helped to establish that. And I've always found it so ironic that he wrote this treatise on improvisation, but he himself was not an improviser. And shortly after he wrote this treatise on improvisation, he said, when you're playing Beethoven, don't improvise. Whereas even in his treatise on improvisation, he gives places that you're supposed to improvise, like at fermatas, at on repeats of sections. So it's a very complicated path. Oh, I'm fascinated also by Johann Sebastian Bach and by the tradition of improvising in among organists. One of my favorite books, Nikhil, is this book by Andreas Werkmeister. He was a German organist. And one of my favorite books is his 1698 Orgelprobe. That means organ tutorial. And he talks about how to play an organ, how to manage the stops. And he also gives other practical advice, such about how to get a job as an organist in 1698. And he says, if you're trying to get a job as an organist at a church, you need to be able to harmonize chorales, play French chanson, and play beer drinking songs. It's like, what? It's like this cross pollination of the sacred and the secular, which was always part of life of an organist. That makes me think of what John Eliot Gardner talks about in his Music in the Castle of Heaven, his biography of Bach. He talks about what it was like being at the Thomaskirche in Leipzig. And then right across the street, there were beer halls and coffee houses. And he said the same people were in both. In the Thomaskirche in Leipzig, of course, the people who were higher up in society got to sit near the front. But at the back, it was all kinds of people. Children playing, dogs running, people throwing darts. And then there were always people taking a nap on the back pews. And he goes over to the culture of the coffee house, and it was the same group of people. Dogs running around, So basically the sacred and the secular were very much attached.
You said the magic word just now that we're Partimento. This whole channel is obsessed with Partimento ever since I discovered it in 2019. What does that word mean to you? I mean, you were probably already improvising, but did that word have any significance to you in your research and in your own private studies and your teaching?
No, it had no meaning. In fact, I don't think I even knew the word until about 20 years ago. Um, I knew how to do a figured bass. I had seen basso continuo. And of course, as a jazz musician, I knew how to read lead sheets. And this idea of reading lead sheets is very much related to the fulfillment of Partimento because you have to know harmonies and you have to know which harmonies, how the harmonic system works. And I actually started a course at UNCG, that's the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, where I teach, called Keyboard Harmony. And it's a requirement for all of our piano majors, undergraduate piano majors. And the first semester is basically an overview of the most common diatonic progressions used in tonal music in the texture of SAT in the right hand, B in the left. So they have to be able to do in every key. And then they have to also do some kind of textual, stylistic, compositional variant. So they could do. I love this progression, which is the basis of Beethoven Opus 79. It's also the basis of Opus 109 and Chopin. So my students, they always have to take a progression and do something with it. For instance, if I took this progression and I put it in the style of a French overture, Baroque French overture. And
Oh,
I could do it in the style of a pop ballad. Okay, I'm not a singer, but I'm going to make up words to a pop ballad. Okay, what are my words? Okay. You make the best pancakes I've ever tasted in my life with the honey and the molasses on the side. So I did it in the style of a Baroque piece and in the style of a pop ballad. I've always done this with hymns too. I love hymnals, and I love taking hymns and doing things with them. Do you know this piece? That's the doxology that's used in many Protestant hymnals. Well, I can play that in the style of a Baroque dance in 3/8. Okay. I can do it in
oh,
the
you're so
style
fluent.
ballad. Okay, jazz ballad. Here's the doxology as a jazz ballad. from some
Oh yeah, no, not not
churches.
not in liturgy, but maybe a concert.
So, so do you feel sorry for my students now?
I don't feel sorry for your students. I think your students, I mean, I can't speak for them, but if I were a student, I'd be very thrilled to have a teacher like you who demonstrates, is practical, is clearly very fluent at doing so many things musically, a very fluent musician. A musician, a thorough musician. It's rare to find something like someone like that. I have a question for you now, which with regard to the things that you demonstrated. Now, I feel a lot of modern classical students get hung up on the classical modern theory. Like that's just my perception. A lot of the things you've shown are very logical movements, very practical. You don't really need to say much. Just do it. You can demonstrate it. Do you find sometimes that modern theory can get in the way of things like that? Like, oh, this goes there and that, and you get hung up on the theoretical side. And I understand theory has many different camps. There's the Partimento camp, there's the Roman numeral camp, there's the functions and the Schenker, and so on and so forth. But what do you think about theory? Maybe as that topic we should get into.
Well, every time I see one of my colleagues, a music theorist, in the halls of my school, we start some kind of argument, but it's a very happy argument. I say, so who invented the French augmented sixth chord? And why is this one French and this one is German and this one is Italian? Um, I'm a kind of closet theorist. I love looking at things, but sometimes music defies theory. I had a student who was playing this the other day. And this student said, Dr. Salmon, can you help me put Roman numerals here in this piece? Because my theory teacher told me I had to analyze it. And I said, okay. And we did this. That's 1/6. Here's 2, half diminished, resolves to a dominant seventh chord. He said, and this is, of course, a French augmented sixth chord, which resolves to a D minor chord. So are we in D minor? In other words, it's very difficult to put a Roman numeral, to Roman numeralize many pieces. How would I Roman numeralize this?
Rule of the octave.
What key is Wagner in? And of course, this whole idea of evading and transcending rules has existed for a long time. One of my favorite quotes, which I just found, is by, okay, let me get up. I wrote it down just a second.
Sure.
Okay. There's a guy who was named Ernst Ludwig Gerber, who was a German musician. And one time he was commenting on Beethoven's works. And here's what Gerber said in 1817: the madder, the better. This is an endless straining after distant keys and modulations, inharmonic deviations, ear-splitting dissonances, and chromatic progressions, an incessant process and without respite for the listener. In such a way, we hear and play nothing but fantasies. Our sonatas are fantasies, our overtures are fantasies, and even our symphonies, at least those of Beethoven, are his, like they're fantasies. So, in other words, people could not understand what Beethoven was doing. It was sort of like Beethoven was also a rule stretcher, a rule breaker. I mean, are we supposed to go to F? Are we supposed to go to G major at the very beginning of a sonata in C major? And then are we supposed to go to B flat major, or is it F major? So he's already, before, I mean, Leopold Mozart would have been completely flabbergasted. Not to mention the second theme. This is not, that's not a key that Leopold Mozart would have gone to. And I'm sure that some of his, Leopold's son's works, Wolfi's works, also offended Leopold, because Leopold was a conservative, a school marm for composition.
So we were talking about theory. So with theory, we were talking about uh, getting in the way. You already just talked about certain things that appear to be unanalyzable, and I'm sure there are people who are going to argue that they are. And I know that I know exactly what you're saying. I do actually really believe that what you do is a lot more practical because you just get the sound and do you feel that this helps students the word audiate, like for instance when you know the patterns and you can see them in the score, you're aware of them when you improvise on them. Is that a great kind of ear training, like a sense that you really can recognize it, and it's not a really sometimes ear training exercises can be like almost artificial in a laboratory, whereas this is you get your hands dirty in the music and you hear things. Like you said, you hear different styles, you transpose. Maybe that's not the best word, but you take a pattern and you shift it in different styles, different genres. Is that very good for the ear? How do you feel that contributes to a student's ear training?
Here's the short answer. I have no idea. I never took ear training. I don't know what ear training is. I do know that I grew up with perfect pitch, and so I have no relative pitch. I remember being in church as a 10-year-old and seeing the hymn in the hymn book in the key of F major, but the organist played it in D flat major. And that completely annihilated my ability to read the hymn, because what I was hearing was not what was on the page. So I have no relative pitch. Ear training, I don't know. I think ear training is, of course, based on systems. I mean, ear training will say, okay, you have to know what a perfect fifth is. And then you have to know what a triad is. A major triad is. I'm all in favor of that. I don't think that music theory is an unnecessary discipline or ear training. The way I put it to my students, though, is observation. Let's observe all the things we can about this piece. This is a C minor chord. This is an F minor chord with, I guess in jazz we call it F minor 7. This is a G augmented triad, but we also could call it in jazz G13, G flat 13, G7 flat 13. So I have nothing against theory, but I always think every time you play a piece, you should observe something about it, whether it's key relationships, tonality, texture, and of course there's some music that I'm not a post-tonal theorist, so don't expect me to explain to you or I don't know about pitch class sets. Don't ask me about that. But I am very interested to learn. I think that as going back to the Leipzig Conservatory in 1843, that kind of set the trajectory of the preparation of a pianist is you go and you do what's on the page and then you repeat, you repeat, you repeat, you repeat. And there was kind of like, don't think, just do it. And there was kind of you dissuade students from probing. I remember looking at some exercises. I think it was Hanon exercises. One time that it said 16 Mal wiederholen. So you would do a little exercise. And then when you finished it, you had to repeat it 16 times. So don't you feel sorry for those students' parents who had to listen to that? 16 Mal wiederholen. No, 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 no. I think it's better not to repeat mindlessly, but to think about what you're doing and to try to observe things, whether it be a theoretical or just maybe say, oh, this key reminds me of something very sad. Oh, speaking of B minor, you know what Beethoven called B minor?
What did he say?
He called it Die schwarze Tonart. That means the black tonality or the dark tonality. In other words, he associated a particular affect with keys. And of course, everybody did. As soon as tonality became coherent and systematized, people started associating affects with certain keys. Oh, another one of my favorite books is by Rita Steblin. It's called Key Characteristics of the 18th and 19th Centuries. Steblin is spelled Steblin, first name Rita, Rita. And what she does in this book is she says what all the treatises of the 18th and 19th century said about keys. For instance, C major is always happy, joyous. Same thing with D major is joyous and majestic. F minor is passionate or gloomy. B minor is, you'll never find anybody in the 18th and 19th century who called B minor happy, joyous, jubilant. B minor is the sad key. Think of this piece also. That's the Adagio in B minor by Mozart, one of the saddest pieces I know. There's no happy piece in B minor. If any of your viewers want to disagree with me about that, say, oh, what about this piece in B minor? Okay, what if someone says, how about this one? That's not happy.
Oh, I got one. How about it's a minor key, so it's not going to be happy. It's a minor key, but Bach's Badineri. You know, I don't know if I said it right. The for the orchestral suite. You know, in B minor.
Oh yeah, that's a good example. Is that in B minor?
Yeah, I think it's I think it's B minor.
Is that the piece that you're thinking of?
Yeah, exactly.
When I think of that piece, I always remember the Swingle Singers. And they were also very influential to me. Do you know who the Swingle Singers were? It was, you just got muted again.
Oh, hold on.
Yeah,
sorry.
that's the Swingle Singers. So this guy, Ward Swingle, I love that's the way I first learned the Badineri. So when I hear it in my head, I hear them going, so you've just given me a good counter to the idea that the B minor is always sad. I accept your proposal that B minor is not always sad.
Well, Professor Salmon, it's been a really really awesome hour talking to you. I mean, where have you been all my life? I mean, really, you're a solid musician. You're really a musician. I mean, that's so rare among musicians. I hate to say that, but it's true. You know, you really are a fluent musician, and it's really a pleasure to get to know you. I can think of, I don't know, do you know Professor John Mortensen? He's also a piano professor. I don't know, you guys would be a real fun conversation to have on the same program.
Really, I've never met him in person, but a couple of years ago, he had, or maybe it was 1 year ago, he had a conference, a virtual conference on historical improvisation, and I contributed a video for that that you can
Oh.
also find online. It's called Playing with Bach, in which I do a lot of weird stuff with Bach. My books, Add on Bach, Jazz Up the Inventions, and Jazz Up the Sinfonias,
Yeah.
are basically inspired by the things that John Mortensen is inspired by, and come a lot from Ward Swingle's Swingle Singers stuff from the 1960s. So yes, I'll look forward to hanging out with you in person someday, John Mortensen in person. Noam Sivan is another great person.
I was just thinking of that. This is my idea. Piano professors who can improvise classically. So it's like I should have a panel like that. That would be so much fun. And you guys could just really talk about education. You know, it would be really interesting. The world, students especially, need to hear your voice and hear that there is, because, you know, like you said, the prevalent opinion is you don't improvise, you don't think about it, you're being werktreue, you know, you're disrespectful to people who are long gone. And it's not at all disrespectful. I mean, they improvise. Like, what's going on? So, I mean, maybe we could have a panel. It would be fun. I mean, if I could coordinate everyone's schedule, it could be a lot of fun. And I really go ahead.
I was going to say Luca Chiantore. I don't know if you know him. He lives
No.
in Barcelona. He's in Italy, and he has Chiantore. I don't know if I'm saying his last name correctly. It's Chiantore.
Okay.
Luca is his first name, Luca. He lives in Barcelona, but he's from Italy, and one time he played the Emperor Concerto, and he had all kinds of improvisations and cadenzas in the. But we're like spirits. But I'll look forward to being with us in a room, whether virtual or real, someday.
Now, why don't we end off with final thoughts? Maybe my show is really about music education, and you know, I would consider you a statesman for classical improvisation, a really important person, a representative person. What could you say for students listening in, educators? Because I think this is a very important trend. I think a lot of young people are getting aware of this, that this history is coming back strong. A lot of younger people are embracing this. It's changing things, it's shaking things up. What would you like to end up? Maybe a final message, Professor Salmon.
My idea is do something new every day, whether it's that's in 7/8. No. So I did a scale in 7/8 meter. I mean, that's new. Or take a piece that you know and do something new with it. Like, how about if you did it as a 3/8? Uh, in other words, keep experimenting. Don't do what's on the page.
Oh man, you are brilliant. That is fantastic. This is awesome.
I had a
Well,
great time. Thank you so much. I hope we can be together again.
we will do this again. Let's stay in touch on email because I really want to set that up, and I think a lot of people would really like to see more of this. And um, do you want to end off? Maybe why don't you play us out? Let's pretend we're a radio station. You want to play us out on something?
Okay, how about a quick version of Dave Brubeck's The Duke.
Go ahead.
I love that. Um, I mean, I was going to do, let me do instead the Invention in C major, but with Verzierungen.
Professor John Salmon, thank you for watching the Nikhil Hogan Show, everyone. See you in the next episode.